Hello and welcome back to 40 Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. This VC feature series, we're bringing you a special 3-part bonus feature brought to you by Ecap Financial and their founder, Corinne Thompson. Fundraising is one of the biggest challenges for any founder, and while we often discuss how to navigate the process, in this episode, Corinne will help us take it all the way back to the beginning. In today's episode, you'll find out the key things to do before you step into an investor meeting, from understanding when the time is right to actually raise, choosing between VC, angels, or alternative funding routes, and the essential steps you need to take to prepare for the fundraising journey ahead. So if you're a founder thinking about going down the fundraising route, you really don't want to miss this episode. Get your notebook ready and let's dive into today's episode with Corinne Thompson. Corinne, we often talk about advice for founders while they're fundraising. So I want to take this all the way back to the very beginning with you today and ask a few questions that I know are going to be super helpful for anyone that's going through this process. So as a founder, how do you decide when the time is right to start fundraising? And what routes can you take? I know there's like the VC route, there's the angel route. So talk us through all that if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really good question and one that a lot of companies should be asking more of at the beginning when they're thinking about taking on funding. And it depends on the route you want to take. I think people sort of go down the VC route without really sometimes thinking it through. Like VC is a very specific asset class, particularly in the US. It's all about go big or go home. And VCs just need one company in their portfolio to make it to that beholden forest of an IPO or an exit, and that will return the fund. And the rest of the portfolio tends to be more kind of like middling, or the rest of the portfolio may sort of like die out. But that VC money also comes with a different risk appetite that you have to take. It is all about top line growth, top line growth, top line growth. And I'm talking mainly here, like, the US style in terms of that VC kind of mindset. I'd say if you're not entirely sure you want to go down that route, there are sort of like other routes. Like there are companies out there or founders out there who take on angel funding. And, there's a lot of, particularly in the UK with SEIS and EIS, there's a lot of angel networks. There's a lot of individual investors who are interested in backing companies who may just be interested in exiting for a nice multiple further down the line, or who might want to build a long-term sustainable company. So there's definitely different ways to think about that. And there's also a lot of grant funding out there as well. Like Innovate UK does a lot in terms of grant financing companies. So again, if you're not sure you want to go down the route of any kind of fundraising, but you want to take on some kind of capital, maybe grant funding might be an option. But I'd say to really think about what is your own risk appetite, because that VC piece is you are all in. It is all or nothing, and you have to build and really kind of dedicate yourself to that company for the however kind of X number of years until you either see some kind of fruition exit, or your company's not the company that then kind of makes it. So yeah, I'd say to really sort of consider that at the beginning before you step on that sort of escalator of VC money.
Great advice. And what are the steps founders should take when preparing for a fundraise? And how far in advance should the planning begin?
Yeah, I look at it in kind of two core ways. There's a lot of companies that come to me and they're like, hey, I saw these guys got this amazing valuation and they raised this, hundreds of millions of fresh capital. How did they do it when we're doing something similar? And what I would say is there's a commercial piece to fundraising and then there's an operational piece to fundraising. On the commercial side, it's the founders who are out there in the market, regularly meeting investors, going for breakfast, lunch, dinners, drinks, whatever it might be, and who are on speaking stages, who are creating a brand for themselves and their companies, and who are really evangelizing sort of their business, their company, and being the kind of standout entity that's sort of out there at the moment. And I kind of repeat this quite a lot. A lot of fundraising is just sales, but it's almost enterprise sales, i.e. it's very relationship based and it's very relationship driven. And so what I would say is from a commercial standpoint, even if you're thinking about a fundraise, not for the next kind of 18 months or 24 months or whatever it might be, get out there now, build the networks, build the relationships, keep in contact with investors. On the flip side, there's also more the kind of like operational back office piece, which is like making sure that you have all your collateral, all the information together. And I always say there's sort of like 5 core work streams to that. So the first is really like nailing down your fundraising strategy. And you should start to do this kind of like 3-4 months before you like formally kick off the fundraise. And with this kind of fundraising strategy, I would say get the individuals that are going to be going out to market with you, like doing this fundraise in a room alongside like board members, NEDs, advisors, whoever it might be that kind of like knows the company well, and start to have a think about, okay, since our last fundraise or since inception of the company, like what are everything that we've, or what is, everything that we've achieved to date, basically in terms of revenues, customers, team, traction, board, international markets, like whatever it might be that you've kind of like nailed or won in the space. And then think about, okay, well, what are the sort of, at a very basic level, what's the sort of SWOT analysis on this? Like, what are our strengths? Where are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities in the market? Where might the threats lie? And then think about where you want to go to. Like, what is that big vision that you set out to achieve? And then, like, what might those steps look like to get to that achievement point? And so I'd say that's sort of like work stream 1. Work stream 2 is then to build all the collateral that goes with that. So that's your like model, your deck, your data room, just get everything set up in advance of kicking off the fundraise. You want to think about your team, and this is like your internal team. So it's normally CEO, CFO, COO might be involved, CRO definitely will be involved. Like get them kind of like engaged on board, make sure you're all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet. But there's also the external team as well, like using really good fundraising lawyers, making sure that you've got them engaged and ready to go. Sometimes companies use corporate finance boutiques if they want additional help in terms of like intros to investors. So again, speak to a lot of them, you'll kiss a lot of frogs, but like you'll find someone that kind of like clicks with you and you're like, okay, they can talk on behalf of our company. And then the fourth thing I'd say is like get your investor list together. So go to your board, go to your advisors, go to the internal team, like look through your emails and be like, okay, who's everyone that we've spoken to so far, and get them all in some kind of like spreadsheet or all in some kind of like CRM system. But basically get them all together and be like, okay, have they invested in one of our competitors? Are they still investing in the space? Do they have a fund at the moment? Does the check size kind of marry to what we're looking for? Like go through the list and be like, is it a warm intro? Or are we going to be like cold outbounding here? And then the final thing I would say is like get a CRM system in place. Like you've got to run fundraising like you would run a sales process. And, you would expect your sales process to be run in like Pipedrive or HubSpot or Salesforce or, one of these kind of CRM systems. Like make sure that you've got all these kind of names. And there's other ones I like out there, like Attio or One Page CRM, who basically you can put all the investor names in and make sure they sync with the kind of emails so that like you just track everything and everything's run super smoothly so that if there's questions come in, you answer them straight away. You can move people through different stages of the pipeline or the funnel. And everything then is quite like a slick organizational machine. So yeah, that's the kind of split I'd say between like commercial piece and then the operational piece.
Absolute gold dust. Thank you, Corinne. Really appreciate it. And there are common mistakes founders will make during the fundraising process. This comes up on the podcast a lot. But what are some of the very early mistakes you see founders make even before that fundraising journey even begins?
Yeah, there's a couple that I'll sort of speak to. Again, a lot of companies want to raise from the US, and it's understandable, right? Like the US it's a massive market, but also from a fundraising perspective, valuations are higher, check sizes are higher, the land grab game out there is higher. Like, the VC market, I'd say, is a lot more, as I've said before, kind of like the go big or go home kind of mindset. But one thing that VCs really care about, or investors really care about, is how big is the market and how fast is the market growing? And it's more a case of like, even if you have a thin slice of that massive market, you're still going to take a huge share of revenue and a huge share of the kind of like market potential. And sometimes I see companies almost like they have a niche or a point solution and almost like narrowing down that market too far. And it's like, even when you're, I'm all for focus and like really getting kind of like traction in key areas, but like think about the wider ecosystem and think about the market that is available to you to go after and start talking to that, at least in your head or with the team, before you even like approach some kind of like fundraising round. I would also say as well, just with that, and again, kind of like on the US side of things, and again, talking to the fact that like fundraising is sales, it's a lot about like, forward momentum. It's a lot of getting investor conviction and buy-in. It's a lot of like charisma. It's a lot of bringing a lot of energy to it. And actually, there's quite a lot of founders out there who I think would just benefit from like a little bit of coaching in advance of going into a fundraising round. So they are prepped and ready to go and like understand the kind of magnitude of energy that it's going to require to go out there and fundraise. Some other like small things is just have all your collateral like ready to go, right? Like you don't want to be like building things on the fly or iterating things on the fly. The same goes for having like a clear story and narrative. Even if, further down the line, you don't stick to it and like what you raise against versus what you become two separate things. Like you just want to make sure in the moment that you have a kind of clear story. And then I'd say before you even kind of start thinking about fundraising, build that network of people that may be interested in investing in your company or who can make introductions to you as part of a fundraising round. So I'd say those are the kind of like core things that I see either happening too late or people just don't consider as they think about a fundraising round.
You mentioned the importance of getting your collateral together. So, what does an ideal setup look like in terms of documents, metrics that you need to start preparing for pitching effectively to investors?
Yeah, at a very basic level, you need your financial model, you need your investor deck. As part of doing the investor deck, you would probably do some kind of like TAM, SAM, SOM calculation so you can show the size of the market and then the piece of the pie that you intend to take in the like medium and then the short term basic. I'd also say like you need to sort out like a very basic data room, but just get all your kind of like collateral together. It then really depends on the stage and the size of the company, because what I would say is like, if you are more B2B SaaS software and you're doing a Series B onwards, right? The metrics that you really need to think about there are things like NRR, GRR, Rule of 40, ARR, ARR growth, contracted ARR versus live ARR, CAC payback, all the kind of like pure B2B SaaS metrics, and make sure they fall within the kind of like benchmarks of like what is good in the industry. And if they're not good or they need tweaking in some way, have a think about like what some of those responses kind of they might be. Also, with Series B onwards, investors tend to care about things like usage stats. So, like, once you get a customer, like, how many times are they engaging with the product? Is this a sticky product? And you can see, companies who get like wild valuations. So, for instance, like Canva, it's obviously a case of like their usage stats are just so high because customers just keep coming back and coming back and coming back to the product. If you're more, say, for instance, in like deep tech, with regards to deep tech, it's a lot more about the timing. It's like, why is it now? Like, why is the right time for an investor to put money into this company? And is there some kind of like commercial point that's about to flip? So I worked with quite a few companies in the quantum computing space or like hyperspectral imaging or like some of these kind of real sort of like deep tech spaces. And one of the things is always kind of like, okay, like why is the time now versus in 5 years' time when we can just wait it out a little bit longer? So I'd say, yeah, those are some of the key kind of like pieces that I would basically get in place when you're thinking about fundraise.
Thanks so much. That's super helpful. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket-sized mentorship.